Welcome to video clip 4.6, in which we discuss resource allocation patterns. So, during the execution, activity instances need to be allocated to resources, most importantly to employees. So we have the process model, and that's the same one as that's a variant, a simplified variant of the one that we've seen before. And so during execution, so we have a corporation where we have sales, warehouse management, and logistics. We have different activities. We have start events, so the order is received. And then there's the task, verify order, and you see here by these by the marker, it's a user task. So a person should create or should execute the verify order task. And now the question is, we just have the information that it's called sales. So we have in the model, we just have the label of the lane, which is called sales. So the question is, who of the sales people should do that? And that's exactly the role of resource allocation. So for one particular process instance and one particular activity instance, the question is, who can do that? Who should do that? Who can do that? It's not that the system should select people, but the system should support the selection of people, as we will discuss in a minute. And of course, then the process continues. Here we have a system task or a service task. Check inventory availability is a service task, so we don't need to allocate a resource to that. But then we have obtained product from warehouse, or physically the product needs to be obtained from the warehouse. That's done by warehouse management. And also here we need to find a resource that is capable of doing this, and so forth. So all user tasks that we've seen here, all user tasks shall be then, for all user tasks, we shall identify a person or a set of persons to be to conduct this before the process then terminate successfully. All right, to make that a bit more clear, we reiterate this example with let's say concrete persons, so employees. So in sales we have Anne, Bridget, and Charles. In warehouse management we have Daniel and Eva. In logistics we have Frank and George. So let's start the process. The process starts again with a verify order. And I will just use the pen. Verify order is an activity that is conducted by sales. So I need to look at the sales. Yeah? We need to look at the resources, the sales resources. So that's one resource, and there are three employees working in this, having this role, so to speak. And then, for instance, we select Anne, or Anne is. There are different ways of allocating these resources. So we are not saying Anne is doing this, but the question we need to face here is that resources need to be allocated, activities need to be allocated to the resources, and here we assume that somehow the people work together and decide that Anne would do that. And the way this allocation is done, I will discuss later in this video clip. All right, so first so Anne is selected here, then check inventory, then obtain product from warehouse. Here we have the warehouse management, and the warehouse management, of course, is here, done by Daniel and Eva. Obtain product from warehouse. There's agreement that Eva should do that. The product is then, well, the shipment is confirmed again. That can be Bridget. Bridget is also a salesperson, so why not? We can choose Bridget here. Bridget can do that. Ship products is logistics. Logistics, we have here the logistics persons, which is Frank and George. And so ship product should be done. George is doing this. Handle payment. Charles can handle the payment. And Anne can again archive the order, for instance. So we have, via this indirection of the resources, a mapping of the activity instances to the particular persons that are involved here. Now the question is, how does this allocation take place? I was very fuzzy about how the relationship is then, let's say, installed, or how the allocation is actually performed. So the process model specifies a role, and each member of a role is capable of performing the task. So assume these are all roles. In general, it's resources, but we can say that's roles in this context. During runtime, the activity instance, an activity instance is offered to all persons available to members of that role. And that is now discussing the first type of allocation, which is the role-based allocation. And that is the one that we basically talked about before. There's the role sales, the role warehouse management, and so forth. And during runtime, activity instance is offered to all persons available who are members of that role. So there might be members of the role who are not on duty currently, so we cannot offer these activity instances to these persons. But from the set of persons who are available, we can offer that, and we can make sure that that is actually also taken and the activity instance is performed. So examples we have here: verification of a purchase order is offered to each member of the role sales. One employee of that role will take the activity instance and will perform it. So that can be performed by using some kind of inbox mechanism, where you have an inbox similar to a mail inbox, where the things that need to be done in the context of a process are represented. You can select it, perform it, get the data automatic. That's basically the question: which infrastructure, which IT system to support the process execution you have in place. Okay, that was the first one, role-based allocation. Now we have direct allocation. So direct allocation means that an individual person is specified in the process model already. Sorry. So that is useful if skills of a particular person are required. For instance, and we have a nice example here, so changes to a legacy software system often require the participation of the original developer, of the original software architect, regardless of his or her current position in an organization. So we can use the pen again, and maybe we can use the black version of the pen again. So I might have a company here that has a support team. I hope you can read it, support team. So that's one lane is specified by support team, and the other is by the name of the developer, that is whatever, Peter Jones. Yeah? So we have here an activity, so there's a support request, and either the support team can handle it, or, well, Peter Jones need to handle it and would then give the result back and it terminates, right? So these are, that is a sketch of a process model where we have direct allocation. So the direct allocation is here. Peter Jones is the person who is in charge of fixing the bug in case the support team is unable to do that. And here we have an example of direct allocation where the person directly is selected because it's the only person who can do that. So I'd like to discuss a little bit with you that we could also say, well, if I have a role with just one person attached to this role, so one person has a position and the role, there's only one position in that role, so that the role effectively can only be fulfilled by one position. Isn't that exactly the same as the direct allocation? I have an example, and the example, I again try to use the black color. Okay, so we have here, maybe we have sales, and here we have the CEO. So assume CEO needs to sign a contract in certain cases. So if the amount is high, something like that. So the structure of the process might be quite similar to the one before. So here the contract is prepared. There's a decision. Either I can sign it myself, or I need to take it to the CEO, to the head of the company. and then afterwards, whatever, the contract is sent and it is terminating. All right, so what's the difference to the previous case? That's assuming that there's one CEO. So assume we have only exactly one CEO of the company. Isn't that the same as we've seen before? Well, in one sense, yes, because once we need to conduct this activity, there can only be one person who is able to perform that. But on the other hand, it provides a bit more flexibility in the sense that once CEOs do change, and a change of the CEO would then be done automatically, so we do not need to change the process model if the CEO changes. So by using the indirection of the CEO, I can then, even if there's a change in the CEO, I can select the person that is the current CEO, and we don't need to change the process model for that. In the previous case, if Peter Jones is no longer under us, or if Peter Jones has left the company, for instance, then we need to change the process model as well. So we have here one more level of indirection, and therefore it is similar, but it's not the same as direct allocation. Case handling. There's quite some discussion about case handling. That's an approach to process management that looks at flexibility, that puts the case or the process instance as a first level citizen, and everything is arranged around a specific case. And there are certain aspects that are quite interesting for case handling, and one of them is in the context of resource allocation that we discuss here. And that's as follows. So activities of one process instance, one case, shall be performed by the same person. So the person who performed the first activity will also be assigned to the remaining activities of that instance. And that might also be limited to a specific role, so that we only do that for a specific role. And an example we have here, that all interaction with the customer shall be carried out by the same salesperson. So we had in the previous example, we selected, I think here we selected A, here we selected B, here we selected T, and here we selected A again. From the point of view of role-based resource allocation, that's perfectly legal, perfectly okay. However, person Bridget, I think it was Bridget, when Bridget takes over here, she needs to have some background to confirm the shipment. Oh, what type of shipment was that? And she's not really into the process already. So she needs to learn about all the context. And then if Charles needs to handle the payment here, it might also not be a good idea to involve a third person, because Charles does not know about the confirmation, about the order, and about exactly which customer that is, and so forth. So the idea of case handling would be here, not to have this, but the idea of case handling would be, and that should not surprise you a lot at this point, that all these activities will be done by Anne. Therefore, Anne knows the whole process, knows the case, and therefore is probably able to perform all the activities faster than involving a number of persons. And that's, of course, done in many organizations on a daily basis, but that's a slightly different thing as we've seen before in the context of role-based resource allocation. The next step is history-based allocation. So the resources are allocated based on their participation in previously executed process instances. And the prime example here is the one phase to the customer example. So interaction with the customer shall be carried out by the same sales representative in all cases. So it spans multiple cases. So it's not only for one specific process instance, but for also process instances for the same customer in the past. So here, of course, we would execute it a bit differently. So when the order is received, we will look at the details of the order. So what is the client? And then we have a step. Client, whatever, a certain client needs always to be, let's say, served by Bridget, for instance. And then in that case, we would have here all activities will be carried out by Bridget, based on the assignment that is done on the customer basis and not on the basis of the process instance as we've done before. So in the previous, case-based allocation, the selection of the first selection is not restricted. So N is doing the first, but then I'll do N is also doing the next activities. While in the case of history-based allocation, it is a priori clear who will take that depending on the customer and their respective sales representatives here. All right, that brings us to the end of video clip 4.6, in which we discussed resource allocation patterns. We talked a little bit about activity instances. Often the term work item is used there to encapsulate these activity or task instances. Task assignments determine responsibilities, so used roles and positions, in general resources for that. Resource allocation distributes work items to employees in an organization. We have discussed these 4 resource allocation patterns, as they call it: the role-based allocation, direct allocation, identifying individual persons, case handling allocation. For each case, there's one person responsible for one role for the activities associated to one role or one resource in general. And we closed this video clip with the discussion of the history-based allocation. In this short video clip, I like to summarize week 4. We started in week 4 by looking at activities which have an internal structure. We discussed the hierarchical decomposition of activities in the context of sub-processes. So we can have expanded sub-processes that provide a logical grouping of parts of the process that belong together. We also have the collapsed sub-process that hides away the internal structure, so that can be used for abstraction, for abstract representation of a process model. And we've seen that collapsed sub-processes provide a hierarchical decomposition that can have any number of levels. We took a look at the ad hoc sub-process that is used, or it can be used, for parts in the process in which the activities are not structured. They can be executed several times, also in any order, and they can be executed until a certain condition is met. We looked at activity modifiers that add semantics to activities, both tasks and also sub-processes. There's a multiple instance activity modifier that comes into flavors, so parallel and also sequential execution of the multiple activity instances. And we also have the loop marker with different test time and with a way to specify a condition. We discussed racing events in 2 contexts. So one is interrupting boundary events. So there are racing events in general are events that race against each other. One wins and the other loses, and the winner decides where the process continues. And we learned a new gateway that only comes as split gateway, which is the event-based gateway. Finally, we looked at organization, how to represent organization and how to allocate also resources. We looked at pools and swim lanes to represent organizational units, positions, roles, and general resources. And we looked at resource allocation patterns, which are used to assign activity instances to particular persons or general resources in the organization.